I'm very happy to be here and talk about women's role in peace operation. Women's situation is very close to my heart. I spent 5 years as an ambassador for women's rights in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And like was said here, I was the one that then took the initiative in 2005. We started an initiative to make our first action plan on Security Resolution 1325. It was launched 8th of March in 2006, and we are already on our second plan for 1325. So I will say something about our experience, but I will mostly talk about my experience of working with Sudanese women in the peace process and peace building from 2004, 2005 on. And mostly then not related to NATO, but related to the UN and a little bit to the World Bank. And it's, let me get my paper here. I have to say that already from, the resolution came in year 2000. Before that, there had been a very interesting report by former Minister of Defense from Finland, Elisabeth Rehn, and now President of Liberia, Shirley Johnson. They were commissioned to make a report about women's situation in war and also involvement with peace. And they made a very shocking report. It was called Women, War and Peace. Which showed how women were targeted specifically in war with rape and all kinds of horrible situations. And I think that report really helped push that we got a Security Resolution 1325. But from then on, it has been a struggle to get it, to have the impact. Everybody likes to mention the resolution, but to get it to have an impact in the field and in what both you and others do, it has been hard. One of the first things Norway fought for was to get a gender person into Department of Peacekeeping Operation in the UN. And the lucky thing when Norway wants something, at least we have funding for it. So, which makes things so much easier if you can say, we will pay for it. So we paid for that position for quite a few years. Now it's on the regular budget. And from being one person, and the first one is Comfort Lamptey from Ghana, they were holding that position. She built after a while up a team in Department of Peacekeeping Operation. And there was also a struggle within the Department of Peacekeeping Operation to have this focus on women's issue within that hardcore military thinking. I would also like to say that Norway has a special responsibility, being a small country way up in the north, but not influential really, but we have been influential in quite a few peace processes in the world. Because we are, even though we are a member of NATO, we are really no threat to nobody. So it's easy for us to go in to be mediator in peace processes. A lot of times is this in secret, the involvement. Most of us in the ministry don't know what we are involved with till it bursts open. So it has been important for us also to work with our own people that is involved in these negotiations, secret negotiations, that they have the perspective of women. Because a lot of times, women are not in power situation in these war-torn countries. They are on the back burner. Even though you find, of course, women also in the fighting guerrillas and so on, they're usually not the one that is leading it. So a lot of times they are pushed back in the peace talks. I will also, since it's 100 years since Norway got our voting right for women this year, I would also like to say that not just are we involved in peace negotiations, but we are, of course, also big promoters of women's rights. It is an old historical thing in Norway that women have had lots of power, so even in the Viking time. They say that we got less power when we got to be Christian than we had when we were Vikings. But we were one of the first countries that also gave equal rights to women and to voting rights in 1913. So both this, being involved in peace, having a high profile on women's rights, we need to combine those things. But I would now talk mostly about how we worked with Sudanese women. And I became an ambassador of a women's issue in 2003. I quickly heard our involvement because I worked in the UN department. I quickly then learned about our involvement in Sudan to try to bring about peace between South Sudan and the rest of Sudan. And you know, Sudan is one of Africa's biggest country. In the north there is Muslim, and in the south there is Christian, and a mixture of African religion, and a very mixture also of different ethnic group with different languages. And the Norwegian got involved with Sudan early 19th century by missionary and civil society, helping people. And so it built up a lot of knowledge on Sudan, a lot of contacts, and this was taken then also into the diplomats and the politician, because this civil society in Norway get a lot of money from our donor aid program, and we give a lot of donor aid. We have 1% of our BNP. So these Red Cross missionaries, they all were able to get money, official money, but then also the official authority got involved in Sudan. So in beginning of the 2000, we were very involved then in negotiating peace. The big force, there were different forcing fighters in South Sudan, but the biggest one was called SPLM, and it was headed of Dr. Garang. And our Minister of Development at that time, Hilde Frafjord Johnson, who is now the UN Special Envoy to Sudan, she took a special interest in this peace negotiation. So in the meetings in the ministry, I always heard progress on the peace, and I always asked the question, what about the women? And I was ignored in the beginning. You know, this is too difficult, you know, we cannot bring in this issue too now when we're really trying to get these fighting partners to agree, first to agree in the south, to agree with the north, you know, this is too difficult to involve other dimensions here. But then I start using the tactic of saying, okay, because they were very concerned that they have the ethnic group represented, you know, balance between the ethnic group in South Sudan. But I said, well, but you are not. What you're talking about is 40% of the population in South Sudan, because at that time there were 60% were women, because a lot of people had died during the conflict. So the women were left, and the women were actually running the society. There was the women that was be sure they had produced enough food. They were running villages. So the women had stepped in leadership while the men was out fighting, and many of them then also dying. So I kept saying, what about the rest, the 60%? You are forgetting them. They are not around the peace table, you know. So at the end they said, well, do something. You know, you have the money, do something, but we don't bother us, but try to do something. So what we did is I talked to we had then called UNIFEM, the United Nations for Women's Fund. I talked to them. I talked to the Norwegian Institute for Foreign Affairs. I said, what can we do? And we decided that, first of all, we need knowledge. What can we do for the women in South Sudan? So we did take initiative to bring them to Norway. We had 12 women from South Sudan coming to Norway. And we had planned to do it in 2004. For some reason, difficult passport, whatever, we managed to do it in January. These poor women came to the cold ice, snow Norway in January from South Sudan. And we'll help them with the UN and this Norwegian Institute for Foreign Affairs. We managed to sit down with them and listen to them to say, what do you want? And the thing happened that the same week we were there, the peace agreement was signed. And we were very lucky because Mrs. Garang, you know, we should not underestimate the wives of important people. Rebecca Ragang also came to Norway, and she had great influence on her husband, Dr. Garang, who was leading the political movement, fighting movement in South Sudan. So the highest wish at that time for the women was that, because as soon as the peace agreement was signed, it is this thing that starts, you know, then will be what we call JAM process from the World Bank and the UN, which is a joint assessment agreement to what do we need to build up Sudan to be able to implement this peace. And logical, we need money So there will always be a donor conference, when the same as we had for Afghanistan many times. You know, when we finally managed to get an agreement, establish peace on the ground, we need in, well, of course, with UN forces, we need in, you know, if it's possible, we need in with money to reconstruct the country, and there are donor conferences. And Norway was going to host the first donor conference on Sudan in April. So the women said, we want to be part of that. Our wishes and need has to be reflected in the document to the World Bank and the UN. Our needs need to be represented in the donor conference. Well, the Norwegians start pushing really hard, I have to say, on Sudanese, said you need to include so and so many women in your delegation. We are paying for everything, you know, flying them here and there and staying, whatever. You know, increase your delegation. But there was so much fighting internally to get into this delegation from all these different groups in South Sudan. Women was the last they want to think about. They said, should we bring our wives? No, it's not your wives. We want resourceful people, you know. So, and I would say that it is, I was shocked to find out how little status the women had in Sudan. I remember one time in this process, we worked on a resolution to the Security Council on Sudan. This was, you know, how to secure the peace. I was in New York. There were people from Sudanese women in New York. And we went through the text, and they said, we cannot have it say the people of Sudan in the text. And I said, why not? Well, we are not recognized as women, we are not recognized as human beings, like men. We have to say women and men, boys and girls, because otherwise we are not included in this resolution. That was an eye-opener for me, because human being, I always count all of us. But and also we discussed, we were into discussing land rights, because that's also a big issue in Africa. When men die, it is of course his wife that grow the crops and manage to the land, but it's not the one that inherits the land. It is some kind of distant relatives from the man, another man. So it's very dysfunctional. So we discussed also the ability for women to have owner rights to land. And then one man said to me, Sudanese, how can a property own a property? You know, women were looked upon as a property, and property should not own property. So now when you have that attitude, there's a way to go. So it was for us then to struggle to get the women involved in the donor conference. And again, I had to think about alternatives because our pressure, and we pressure all the way we could to make them include women. So again, we made our own conference, parallel conference, gender symposium. We invited 50 women from North and South Sudan, and I tell you, it wasn't easy, because many have never had a passport. They were not able to get Schengen visa, so we had to fly them by Turkey, by Istanbul, and give them national visa. And it was a lot of practical difficulties. I checked them into the same hotel as the official delegation, the biggest hotel in Oslo, Plaza, and so they were visible. I told the ministry they were going to host a dinner for the official delegations, and I said, I will also host a dinner. You want me to be on the second floor and you on the third floor, or should we join it? So I pressured what I could, because I said, this will look stupid, you know. So we managed then to say, finally they said, okay, we'll, you know, we join, have the joint dinner, right? And this conference was 2 days before the donors conference, so we had time to prepare to get involved with the donor conference. And we had, in the donors conference, we had all kinds of people participating, resourceful women from all over the world, including Mrs. Mbeki from South Africa. We had all UN organizations like UNDP, everybody, UNICEF, everybody came to participate in Department of Peacekeeping Operation. We really got a massive impact on our conference. And we managed also to get the Vice President from Sudan, Mr. Tana, and Dr. Garang, who then was in the peace agreement made as a first Vice President of Sudan. Both those two, that was heading the delegation to the donor conference, and our minister, Hilde Frafjord Johnsen, came and addressed the audience in our conference at the very end. And I can tell you we had press. We had much more press than the donor conference. Because I tell you, in Oslo, 50 women from Sudan is very visible. And then from north, they were in this Arab's outfit. And so and this was held in April. In town, in Oslo, it was everywhere. So we got middle page in the newspaper, we got front page, we got television, we got a lot of attention to our conference, which was extremely good. But, you know, in the beginning I thought this is going to be very difficult to get these women that are Muslims from the north, that haven't felt the war on their body like the women from the south, representing different ethnic groups, etc., etc. How can they agree on something? And that was to my amazing how they could. But I had a very good moderator, Nirazai Gumbanzana from Zimbabwe, and she has worked with the UNIFEM. And she is now head of the World Federation for Girl Scouts, so sitting in Geneva. She's a very talented woman. We picked out, the North and the South got to pick out a small group that's going to participate in their negotiation to bring in a statement into the donor conference. And I was amazed how quickly they could agree what they wanted of the new Sudan. Because there it was not about dividing powers, it was about livelihood for families, for children, for, you know, education, health, jobs, you know, the possibility for a better Sudan. It was not about how to divide power between me and you and I will decide this. And it was not about the oil, you know, because oil is a big factor in Sudan. And too bad the oil is lying sort of in the middle and most maybe in the south, which is making the picture complicated. So they quickly agreed. And also when we managed to get into this reception before the official donor conference, a very smart woman from African Union, she told us, you know what we'll do in that reception? We will work. Each woman, 50 women from Sudan, would at least talk to 3 men from their country, you know, or the UN. Use that reception to push the women's issue into the heads of these men. And so we did. So we worked very hard. And because of the pressure, because the attention of the media, the delegation had to give in. At the end, they had to take in women because they saw they didn't have a choice. So the next day when we opened the conference, they had women participation from our donor symposium. They took in the women into their own delegation, which was very good for us. And also I have to say, it takes time in this world. UNIFEM, the UN Women's Fund at that time, did not have the status as UNDP, UNICEF and other UN entities. So they were not able really to speak around the board. But then the Norwegian, luckily, I pressured them to say, you need to make room for UNIFEM, the only one that speaks for 60% of South Sudan. You know, you cannot have just UNICEF talking about the children. You don't have anybody talking for the grown women. This is not possible in Norway. So Norway took a decision, we'll just make the room wider and put on UNIFEM. So for first time in the donor conference, we had somebody talking for women's voice and women's right. And so that also made an impression. And then we had the 2 women, one from north, one from south, reading the statement to the donor conference together. And we did strategically let the one from north give the message in her white outfit, from Arab outfit. She gave the message, the other one handed her the paper and she read it. And so we managed to have a good success in that, but it was hard work, and the war is not won, because we see other donor conference, we just have to do the same fight all over again. But it was sort of a breakthrough in the UN, and also working with the World Bank, that they cannot do this assessment, build up these trust funds without having also a focus on the women, which is a lot of times the majority of the people. So this is what I want to share with you, and I also want to say then that things have moved on, luckily for us. We have pressured UN to merge all the women entity into what is now called UN Women, and UN Women have now the status as UNDP, UNICEF and the others. So now you cannot avoid having somebody speaking for women's rights around the UN table. So it's, but like I said, this war goes on. Thank you.